Welcome to the Risk Wheelhouse, the podcast where we navigate the ever-changing seas of risk management and technology. Join your hosts, Ori Wellington and Sam Jones, as they steer you through the latest trends, insights, and strategies shaping the future of integrated risk management. Ready to chart a course towards success? Hop aboard and let's set sail into today's deep dive.
Integrated risk management. It's supposed to be the connective tissue for the modern enterprise, linking security, compliance, privacy, and business strategy into one cohesive operational system.
It's the cornerstone of resilience, or at least it should be.
Yet, when you, as the risk or resilience leader, walk into the CFO's office or you stand before the board to ask for capital, there's often this immediate and I'd say sometimes deserved skepticism about its true financial impact.
Oh, absolutely.
And why is that? It's because you are constantly being asked to prove its return on investment, its ROI.
And that right there is the absolute foundational problem we have to confront. We are routinely forcing integrated risk management, IRM, into an ROI framing that, well, it just doesn't fit its economic reality.
What do you mean by that? It's economic reality.
It's a distributed value generator. The whole model is wrong. It's a fundamental measurement mismatch. It's sort of like trying to measure the systemic health of a massive integrated supply chain using the profitability metric of a single small inventory warehouse. The calculation itself is structurally biased against the outcome we're actually trying to achieve.
Which is that systemic resilience and performance lift.
Exactly.
So this deep dive is our response to that bias, and we're drawing on some really critical, cutting-edge research to fundamentally reframe this whole value conversation. Our anchor is the RTJ Bridge research note. IRM does not produce ROI, it produces dividends, authored by you.
That's right. And the core thesis that really drives this analysis is that the current ROI framework, at least as is traditionally applied to strategic investments like IRM, it systematically misprices its value.
Misprices it how?
It misprices it because the framework rigidly demands a single, isolated, and strictly attributable cash flow stream tied directly back to the investment. But IRM is designed to do the exact opposite.
It's designed to distribute value across the organization, not isolate it.
It integrates. It doesn't compartmentalize.
Precisely. So we need a different model.
We have to fundamentally upgrade our measurement model. We need to adopt the lens of dividends, a concept that acknowledges and measures these distributed outcomes. These dividends are the beneficial effects that fundamentally improve enterprise performance and resilience across numerous interconnected domains.
Okay, so our mission today is to unpack exactly why this legacy habit of forcing IRM into the, let's call it the GRC calculator mindset, distorts capital allocation and decision-making at the executive level.
Right.
And crucially, we need to show why this distortion is becoming exponentially more dangerous, more constraining, as artificial intelligence shifts the entire economic value calculus for the modern enterprise.
Yeah, this is not a tactical discussion anymore.
No, we are moving this conversation from a tactical GRC procurement discussion to a mandatory executive capital allocation imperative.
Okay, so let's start with first principles. And that means being really rigorous about the language we use.
Especially when you're communicating with finance leaders, CFOs, and the board.
Absolutely. We have to be precise about what ROI actually means in a strict financial context. It's not, it's not a flexible term in accounting.
And what does that strict finance construct demand of any investment?
It demands the measurement of incremental cash flows that are strictly, directly, and verifiably attributable to the investment, measured against the initial cost over a defined time horizon.
So you have to prove that direct causal link.
You have to construct a defensible chain of causality. Investment X directly and singularly caused cash flow Y. That linkage, it has to be auditable, verifiable, and it has to withstand skeptical review. That's just the necessary rigor of capital expenditure accounting and finance.
And this is exactly where integrated risk management just hits a conceptual and quantitative wall.
It really does.
I mean, IRM, by its very definition and purpose, is designed to weave disparate processes, controls, technologies, and teams together. It's designed to be ubiquitous, the infrastructure for trust.
That's the conceptual contradiction right there. IRM integrates security controls with compliance regimes, it feeds audit evidence back into policy frameworks, and it connects operational risk data to business continuity planning.
So it's designed to create a systemic effect.
Yes, a systemic reduction in drag and an increase in assurance. But because it is so systemic, attribution is inherently and, frankly, hopelessly weak across these integrated domains.
Can you give us a concrete example of that attribution weakness?
Sure. Imagine an organization implements a modern, robust, integrated policy management and third-party risk management workflow, all powered by their IRM suite.
Okay.
Now, this single workflow, it simultaneously accomplishes three things. It reduces a critical supply chain security exposure, it improves a major regulatory compliance reporting mechanism, and it speeds up the due diligence process for the procurement team who's just trying to onboard a new vendor.
So you've got a security benefit, a compliance benefit, and a procurement velocity benefit, all from one investment.
Exactly. Now, try to attribute the subsequent cash flow gain. Did the security reduction cause a lower expected loss? Did the compliance improvement save an operational expense? Did the procurement acceleration increase revenue?
All three. Some combination.
Right. And if you try to collapse those three distributed benefits into a single, isolated ROI number for that IRM investment, the linkage becomes highly tenuous. It's based on numerous shaky assumptions.
It becomes fuzzy fast. And I imagine finance leaders who are just trained to look for those deterministic linkages, they immediately challenge that.
They do. And this is the critical takeaway for everyone listening. In the finance world, when attribution is weak and assumptions are layered on top of each other, the calculated ROI quickly ceases to be an auditable, verifiable financial fact.
It just becomes a story.
It degrades into mere narrative. It becomes a story we tell ourselves and the board to justify the spend, rather than a rigorous, quantifiable, decision-grade input for capital allocation. CFOs are masters at identifying these assumptions, and they immediately discount the asserted value of the investment, often by 50% or more.
So the system itself, the integrated distributed nature of IRM, it works against the legacy measurement model.
It fundamentally does.
And that makes sense. But the problem isn't just the definition of ROI, is it? It's also reinforced by the tools that risk leaders are using every day.
Well, for sure.
The legacy GRC calculators out there in the market, they almost seem designed to reinforce this mispricing.
Absolutely. I mean, many of the value calculators and justification models that risk leaders are forced to rely on, they are not truly IRM native. They are fundamentally legacy GRC instruments.
What do you mean by that? GRC instruments?
They were conceived and optimized for a different era, a compliance era, where the primary value conversation revolved around the cost of compliance or maybe the avoidance of fines, framed entirely within a single silo, like IT GRC or internal audit management or just regulatory mapping.
So they are built around measuring inputs and throughput within a checklist framework rather than measuring integrated enterprise-wide outcomes.
Exactly. The measurement model centers on GRC program inputs and throughput. How many policies did you review? How many control tests did you run? How much time did you save the internal audit team?
And those are valid things to count.
They're valid, countable metrics, but they stop short of quantifying the integrated cross-domain enterprise outcomes that truly define IRM value. These tools structurally struggle to quantify the value of cross-domain evidence reuse, true enterprise loss mitigation, and especially the requirements for modern AI trust, which is highly distributed.
So this structural bias in the tooling, which is optimized for counting compliance activities and internal labor hours, makes it nearly impossible for a risk leader to capture the holistic, systemic value that IRM is actually designed to deliver.
It does.
It's forcing a strategic asset back into a tactical cost reduction justification.
That is the crux of it. This compliance-centric, siloed approach, it limits the perceived value entirely to the cost of compliance. And that's a necessary but ultimately insufficient narrative. Senior executives find that narrative insufficient to justify the strategic level of investment IRM truly demands to function as a real enterprise resilience platform.
So we need a new framework.
We need a completely different conceptual framework to accurately convey value, one that embraces distribution.
Okay, so let's unpack this new lens. If ROI is the rigid finance construct that demands singular attribution, then what is the definition of a dividend in this context? Why is it better suited for the distributed nature of IRM?
We use the term dividends because it is a management construct. It's not a financial one.
A management construct.
Right. Unlike ROI, which is financial, dividends represent distributed outcomes that improve enterprise performance and resilience across the entire system. And crucially, they do not need to collapse cleanly into a single attributable cash stream.
So they're more like beneficial effects.
They are beneficial effects spread across the organization. A systemic lift in performance, a quantifiable reduction in systemic drag, and acceleration of velocity all flowing from that central IRM investment. The measurement discipline is showing the collective uplift, not trying to prove singular causality.
That immediately aligns so much better with how risk and resilience actually function in a complex enterprise.
It has to.
Now, the research note identifies 3 core IRM dividends. Let's start with the one that's probably the easiest to measure, the efficiency dividend.
Right. Dividend 1 is the efficiency dividend. This is the most defensible dividend, and that's because it ties directly to observable throughput and cycle time reduction. It's measurable because the input time, labor, rework, administrative drag, it's all visible, countable, and verifiable.
What are some specific, repeatable examples of this that risk leaders should be quantifying right now?
Are you ready to see risk management in action? At Wheelhouse Advisors, we've launched a new YouTube channel dedicated to integrated risk management. You'll find quick explainers, insights from our IRM Navigator research reports, highlights from the Risk Journal, and conversations from the Risk Wheelhouse podcast. We're covering the topics that matter most to executives and risk leaders, from AI governance and cyber insurance to operational resilience and regulatory change. Every video is designed to help you anticipate risks, adapt with confidence, and build resilience in a digital-first world. In our first video, we explain how ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and the NIST AI Risk Management Framework can work together as a unified playbook for AI risk. Subscribe today at youtube.com/@wheelhouseadv and get the latest insights delivered directly to you. That's youtube.com/@wheelhouseadv. Subscribe now and stay ahead of the risks that matter most.
The examples are clear across multiple domains. Think about audit cycle time reduction cutting, the weeks saved between fieldwork completion and the final report sign-off.
That's a huge one.
It is. And consider the massive efficiency gain from automation and reuse of evidence collection. Instead of 3 different teams pulling the same control evidence manually for PCI and GDPR and ISO 27001, the system provides a centralized repository and maps controls automatically. That is pure administrative drag removed from the system.
And that velocity is felt on the back end as well, so reduced rework and faster cycle time for issue remediation. When an issue is identified, the speed at which it gets fixed is a direct measure of operational efficiency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And third-party assessment turn time reduction is perhaps the most visible example for the business side. Procurement cycles often stall for weeks, sometimes months, just waiting for the security and compliance assessments to clear. If you can cut that due diligence turn time by 50%, that's pure velocity added back into the enterprise revenue engine.
Okay, but this is where we need to introduce the crucial analytical discipline you highlight in the research. Efficiency alone doesn't automatically translate into a hard financial saving.
It does not.
And this is where risk leaders often lose credibility with finance.
That's the most vital concept for our audience to grasp, particularly when you're addressing capital allocation. Time saved only converts to money saved, or a realized financial benefit, if the organization can prove one of 2 things. First is cash release, meaning you eliminate a full-time employee position, or you reduce an external operating expenditure, which, let's be honest, is rare in GRC investments.
Right, that's the harder one to prove. So what's the second?
The second and more realistic one is measurable capacity redeployment.
Okay, let's focus on capacity redeployment because that feels like the real opportunity. What is the difference between trapped capacity and realized capacity?
So if a compliance team saves, say, 200 hours of manual, repetitive work like reconciling 2 different control frameworks, but they'd simply use those 200 hours to write longer, more complex, and ultimately unnecessary reports, the capacity is trapped.
Nothing has really been gained for the business.
No measurable value has been created for the enterprise. No cash was released, and no strategic work was accomplished. Benefit just remains potential, not realized.
Versus realized capacity.
Realized capacity is when those 200 hours are demonstrably and strategically redirected. For instance, those same 200 hours are now spent proactively identifying emerging AI model risks, or quantifying the financial exposure of a new geopolitical risks scenario, or performing crucial forward-looking threat modeling that the team previously just lacked the resources to do.
That's real strategic value creation.
It is, even if the cash wasn't released. The efficiency dividend is foundational, but at higher IRM maturity stages, it's insufficient on its own to justify the entire strategic investment. It justifies consolidation, but you need the next dividends to drive the executive conversation.
Which brings us to Dividend 2, the loss mitigation dividend. This is where we move into the economic core of risk management itself.
That's right. The loss mitigation dividend is defined as the reduction in expected loss. Risk management reduces this expected loss by shifting the probability distribution of adverse outcomes, specifically pushing the tails of the distribution inward.
So you're reducing both the likelihood and the severity of a bad event.
We are actively reducing both the likelihood or frequency of a high-impact event and the severity if one does occur.
But here is the challenge that finance leaders always raise. The avoided loss is, by definition, unobservable. You cannot put a deterministic dollar sign on something that didn't happen. And if you claim it, a CFO will rightly ask, how do we know we didn't overinvest if the loss was never going to happen anyway? That sounds like high-level theory. How do we make the case for probabilistic models when the board often demands certainty?
And that skepticism is entirely warranted if the risk leader is just presenting vague narratives or, qualitative heat maps. To overcome the challenge of unobservable loss, decision-grade measurement requires rigorous modeling discipline.
So no more high or medium risk.
No, you cannot rely on qualitative descriptions. You need to adopt quantitative methods.
So what does that rigor look like in practice?
To achieve credibility with finance, a decision-grade loss mitigation approach requires several components. First, it's mandatory to use scenario-based exposure quantification using frequency and severity data. We need to model the impact of, for example, a material data breach or a significant supply chain disruption based on a spectrum of potential financial outcomes, say $10 million at the low end, $50 million at the high end, not just a single worst-case fear number.
So it requires explicit assumptions about how effective your controls are. You have to quantify, using data or expert judgment, what percentage of the financial risk is actually being reduced by the control environment you are building with IRM.
Exactly. If you invest in integrated controls, you must be able to state, this investment is expected to increase the effectiveness of control group A from 70% to 90%, and here is the resultant reduction in financial exposure.
And the presentation of that matters.
Critically, the results must be presented as ranges with confidence levels, not deterministic point estimates. A statement like, we saved the company $5 million this year, is challenged immediately.
Well, what's the alternative?
But a statement like, based on our modeling, we have reduced our 96th percentile expected annual loss from cyber risk from $80 million to $55 million due to integrated control adoption, is far more credible.
That shift in language, from claiming an isolated saving to quantifying a trade-off in potential risk, that's powerful. You're giving them a clear data-driven decision point.
It is decision-grade input. Yeah. And my critique of legacy GRC approaches is that they tend to sidestep this rigor entirely. They either rely on anecdote or they try to translate complex probabilistic risk reduction into deterministic savings. A single fixed dollar amount, which almost always fails finance scrutiny because it lacks the necessary mathematical foundation.
It remains a narrative.
Divorced from verifiable financial facts.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is a fundamental distinction. Which brings us to the third dividend, and this is the one gaining the most strategic heat right now, the trust dividend. And you define it as friction removed, not revenue directly added.
That is the crucial economic distinction. Trust is now an essential economic factor for high-velocity enterprises, but it is best defined and measured as friction removed. Trying to claim that a better compliance program directly drives a new revenue stream is often tenuous and, frankly, fragile.
But measuring how much faster and smoother the existing revenue machine can move, that's the trust dividend.
You're applying lubricant to a high-speed machine to prevent it from seizing up. That's a good way to put it.
So quantify that friction removed for us in a modern enterprise context.
Okay, think about the internal friction points. Faster approvals through legal, privacy, security, and compliance. When the product team finishes developing a new feature, does it sit in a queue for weeks while disparate teams manually check boxes and request documentation that already exists elsewhere?
Or does the IRM system provide that immediate integrated assurance needed for sign-off?
Right, dramatically reducing time to market friction.
And what about those costly late-stage reversals?
Yes, fewer late-stage deployment reversals due to documentation or control gaps. The cost of unwinding a deployment because someone realized at the 11th hour that a key security control was missed or a privacy requirement was violated is enormous. It's lost development time, it's wasted marketing spend, and potential reputational damage. The trust dividend prevents those costs by embedding assurance and control evidence early in the process.
And externally, how does that friction manifest?
Externally, it translates into faster customer assurance responses for AI-enabled products, which reduces sales cycle friction. Customers, particularly large B2B buyers, they demand proof of security and compliance before contracting.
Sure.
If you can provide that proof instantly, credibly, and holistically via your IRM system, you win deals faster. And, crucially, it results in a reduced probability of regulatory escalation stemming from transparency or accountability failures, reducing external drag on the business.
So the ability to quickly and credibly attest to your operating environment suddenly becomes a key competitive differentiator and an economic enabler that directly impacts velocity and capital protection.
It absolutely does.
Okay, here's where this reframing moves from just, important to absolutely mandatory. AI.
Right. AI fundamentally changes the magnitude and the cadence of the trust requirement. The need for trust shifts dramatically from primarily a regulatory compliance concern, something you deal with periodically to satisfy an audit, to a gating mechanism.
Or, as you say in the note, a scale constraint.
An even more accurate term, yes.
Yeah.
A scale constraint for all high-leverage AI initiatives.
Gating mechanism. I mean, if the assurance mechanisms fail, the business process stalls completely. That is a serious strategic constraint.
Precisely. If we look at AI at scale, the deployment of hundreds or even thousands of models across the enterprise, the primary constraint is no longer computational power or even model capability. It's whether the enterprise can prove the system is acceptable, transparent, and controlled.
So can you trace the training data provenance? Can you explain the model's outcomes in a business context?
Can you prove it adheres to internal policy and external regulatory guardrails? All of those questions.
So AI introduces these mandatory evidence-based questions across its entire life cycle that, frankly, traditional compliance and GRC were never built to answer with speed and rigor.
Absolutely. The enterprise must demonstrate trustworthiness characteristics and risk controls across the entire AI lifecycle, from data ingestion and model training all the way through continuous deployment and monitoring. Can the enterprise operationalize an AI management system that actually holds up to internal audits and third-party scrutiny?
And we're talking about adhering to frameworks that are now globally recognized as necessary.
Yes, referencing contexts like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, the RMF, and ISO/IE SOV 2001.
So for the listener who might not be steeped in these standards, what does something like ISO/IE 42001 represent strategically for an executive?
It represents proving due diligence. Strategically, these standards are the requirement for evidence-based accountability. They demand a system for managing AI risk that is structured, repeatable, and auditable.
So it's not enough to just say you thought about it.
No. It means you must be able to prove continuously that you didn't just think about bias mitigation. You implemented controls, you tested them, and here is the evidence trail proving the system is within acceptable risk tolerances. Without that systemic proof, deployment risks catastrophic reversal.
And this means the speed at which you can generate and present that evidence is now an operational necessity. If your transparency and information obligations take too long to meet, your business cycles stall.
That's the critical cadence problem. AI-enabled business processes move at machine speed, often generating decisions in milliseconds. If your risk and compliance assurance mechanisms operate a human or periodic speed checking a box once a quarter, they become a massive drag coefficient.
Slowing deployment and stifling innovation velocity.
Exactly. The trust dividend ensures the assurance moves at the speed of the business. It's the difference between a real-time risk check and a quarterly audit report.
And this escalation in the measurement requirement explains why the trust dividend is increasingly dominating board-level discussions. They're no longer just asking, are we compliant with current law?
No, the question is much bigger.
They're asking, can we scale this multi-million-dollar new business capability without facing regulatory fines, a major reputational setback, or a catastrophic model failure that just destroys enterprise value?
Precisely. The regulatory environment, particularly with the recent global context like the EU AI Act, emphasizes transparency, accountability, and traceable evidence. In this environment, AI fundamentally penalizes compliance-era measurement logic. Assertions, we believe we are doing the right thing, are no longer adequate.
Evidence is everything.
Audit-grade, traceable evidence is mandatory, and the cost of failure is the inability to deploy transformative technology, which means the multi-million-dollar investment in the AI initiative itself is gated by the quality of your risk management infrastructure. This makes trust the decisive economic factor.
Okay, let's unpack this structural problem now in the context of the tools that many risk leaders are still using to justify their spend. We established that the market's current value tooling is structurally biased toward legacy GRC. Let's dig into those specific structural biases, starting with what you call compliance gravity.
Compliance gravity is the gravitational pull of historical necessity. These calculators were born in the era of regulatory checklists.
So they're built for that purpose.
They are. Therefore, they focus heavily on GRC program factors, framing measurement primarily around compliance throughput rather than integrated business outcomes. And the result is a subtle but powerful constraint. It limits the perceived value conversation purely to the cost of compliance.
In other words, the tool itself, by its very design, encourages the risk leader to justify the technology purchase based on saving audit hours or reducing the risk of a small fine.
Yes.
Not based on enabling faster time to market or reducing the probability of catastrophic systemic failure.
Exactly. If the tool asks you primarily, how many reports did you consolidate? Or how much time did you save in policy review? It automatically anchors the executive listener to the realm of cost reduction. And cost reduction is important, but it is a weak argument for strategic, multi-million-dollar capital expenditure. This bias fundamentally fails to capture the true strategic lift provided by an integrated risk view that connects technology risk to enterprise performance.
Okay, the second major bias you identify is silo bias and double counting. This seems unavoidable because organizations often mature incrementally, buying tools for specific domains.
It is, but it's a credibility killer when you're trying to justify an integrated IRM investment.
How so?
It destroys credibility quickly when finance performs even a basic challenge. Many vendors, and this reflects their own product structures and the silo adoption patterns of their early customers, they provide value calculators as discrete assets by domain. A calculator for security, one for compliance, one for internal audit, one for privacy.
So when an organization buys an IRM suite that's intended to integrate these functions, the risk leader can easily fall into the trap of double counting the benefits across these disparate calculators.
This is a classic issue. Let's use a strong, specific example. Imagine you invest in a single, centralized control testing system via your IRM platform. This system automates evidence collection for a single foundational activity, verifying access controls on critical databases.
That one activity.
One activity. But that one activity supports 4 separate programs: PCI compliance, ISO 27001 requirements, GDPR technical controls, and internal IT audit. Now, if you use 4 separate silo calculators, each calculator will claim the labor hours saved on that one activity.
And suddenly, you are claiming 4 times the actual labor saving for the same foundational investment, and your asserted ROI is artificially inflated.
Which, when challenged, instantly destroys the credibility of the entire business case. IRM's core value is using one piece of evidence for many purposes. It's deduplication. The measurement system must reflect that deduplication, but legacy silo calculators are structurally incapable of doing so because they were designed to prove the value of a discrete, siloed point solution.
And the third structural bias is backward-looking measurement logic. How does that fundamentally clash with the demands of continuous operations in the AI era?
Well, legacy models typically start with periodic activity counts to estimate efficiency improvements. They look backward and say, we ran 500 control tests last year, and now we run 1,000 with the same resources. Therefore, we have doubled efficiency. This is historical compliance-era thinking.
It's optimized for those periodic reporting cycles.
Exactly. But AI-era trust requires something far more predictive, immediate, and continuous.
It requires forward-looking assurance.
Absolutely. Forward-looking assurance, traceability, and continuous transparency evidence. AI-enabled systems are operating, adapting, and changing continuously, often at a cadence of hours or even minutes. The assurance cannot be periodic. It needs to be real-time, audit-grade, and always on, providing continuous evidence of trustworthiness.
And the old tools just can't do that.
Older, backward-looking compliance-era activity counters simply are not built to capture this continuous forward-looking validation necessary for scaling AI and autonomous operations. They measure what happened, not what is currently assured.
So the implication here is really clear. These legacy GRC tools, they can be helpful for the initial business case, justifying the move from a foundational stage to a coordinated stage.
Right, for that first step.
But they quickly become a maturity ceiling because they reinforce silo thinking and they significantly underprice the trust dividend, which is now the most critical driver of modern strategic value.
The structural mismatch is now existential. We have to elevate both the measurement tools and the executive conversation.
So let's tie this value discussion directly to the trajectory of organizational maturity. We're moving from basic centralization all the way to autonomous operation, and you track that along the IRM Navigator curve.
Yes, the IRM Navigator curve defines maturity through 5 stages: foundational, coordinated, embedded, extended, and autonomous. And how you measure value and which dividends you emphasize must evolve dramatically as you move across these stages.
And if you use the wrong measurement model for your maturity level?
You will stall. It's that simple.
Okay, so let's start with the early movement, foundational to coordinated.
At these early stages, the legacy GRC calculators actually serve a valid tactical purpose. They support the business case justification for consolidation and standardization efforts. The ROI narrative, focused on achievable efficiency dividends through centralizing control inventories and simplifying reporting, is sufficient to justify that initial investment and the move away from spreadsheet-based chaos.
But as the organization moves toward true integration, the measurement needs to mature dramatically. So that next step, from coordinated to embedded.
This transition is where the organization starts to truly integrate processes. Shared risk assessment methodologies, unified policy management, shared control testing. This transition requires sophisticated value instrumentation that spans domains and reflects truly integrated workflows.
And this is the stage where the limitations of relying solely on the efficiency dividend become really apparent.
Oh, absolutely. Efficiency alone proves insufficient here. You have to start quantifying that cross-domain value reuse.
You have to measure the deduplicated effort.
Precisely. You must start measuring the deduplicated effort, the reduction in risk transfer costs due to shared control efficacy, and the systemic uplift from having holistic visibility into the risk posture. This requires a rigor in measurement that spans security, compliance, and operational risk simultaneously, showing how integrated controls reduce the likelihood and severity of operational losses, which brings the loss mitigation dividend right into focus.
And then the apex of the curve, the advanced stages, extended to autonomous. This requires deep ecosystem interoperability, continuous validation, and automated response loops.
This is the mandatory future state, and it's largely driven by the operational requirements of AI. And here, we must provide the mandatory definition from the research. Autonomous IRM is defined as continuous AI-enabled loops with bounded execution and audit-grade evidence.
That definition ties us right back to the trust dividend and the central argument of this entire discussion. The transition to higher maturity from extended to autonomous is explicitly tied to these AI-era trust demands.
Yeah, absolutely. The AI penalty is the realization that if your current measurement systems are compliance-centric and periodic, they will prevent you from reaching these higher maturity stages.
Why is that?
Because continuous autonomous operations demand continuous audit-grade evidence, not periodic assertions. If your assurance mechanisms are slow, the enterprise cannot operate at the speed required for an autonomous environment. The measurement rigor moves from being, an academic or technical accounting exercise to a mandatory precondition for operational scale.
So the investment in IRM is not just about buying software to save some time. It's buying the future capability to operate at machine velocity with evidence-based accountability.
It is an investment in systemic velocity and systemic control enablement, which directly protects the investments made in every other part of the business, particularly transformative technologies like AI.
This reframing from ROI to dividends requires a conscious, tactical shift in how risk leaders communicate with financial executives and the board. So let's make this tactical now. How should risk leaders speak to finance leaders about these dividends?
The first and most critical step is the vocabulary shift. Stop using the word ROI when you're discussing the total strategic value of the IRM program.
Just drop it from the lexicon.
Drop it. Because that word demands specific, singular attribution, a demand IRM cannot credibly meet. Instead, pivot to dividends. Focus the conversation on how IRM enables enterprise resilience and provides a performance lift across distributed areas. You're aligning your communication with the management construct, which finance leaders understand in terms of systemic improvement and capital protection.
So instead of claiming we achieved a 25% ROI, you should lead with something like, we have realized a significant efficiency dividend through audit cycle time reduction, coupled with a quantifiable reduction in our 95th percentile expected loss across our high-frequency cyber scenarios.
Exactly. That is a robust statement of value. Now, secondly, and this is crucial for maintaining long-term credibility, risk leaders must be rigorously disciplined about the efficiency dividend. You must avoid over-claiming savings.
That's a huge trap.
It is. never promise deterministic cash savings unless they are demonstrable through a verifiable plan for headcount reduction or the clear elimination of a current vendor contract.
So instead of cash savings, the focus should be on capacity redeployment.
Yes. Focus relentlessly on the capacity redeployment aspect.
Oh.
Quantify the ability to execute more high-value, work-like strategic AI risk modeling or geopolitical threat monitoring within the existing resource structure. You are unlocking capacity that can then be strategically redirected toward innovation, growth, or proactively addressing emerging systemic risks.
And that's a real, measurable asset.
Capacity redeployment is a real, measurable, and highly valuable asset, whereas unsubstantiated cash savings are easily dismissed as wishful accounting.
And finally, defending trust investments. The trust dividend is paramount in the AI era. But how do we defend that without falling back on those shaky revenue attribution claims we advised against?
You defend trust investments by focusing on the friction removed and, most importantly, the fact that trust is the gating economic factor for scaling high-leverage assets like AI. Don't claim, this new privacy platform will increase revenue by 2%. That's fragile.
So what's the better claim?
Instead, quantify the reduction in time to market due to faster legal and privacy sign-offs, meaning the product is in the customer's hands 30 days sooner. Quantify the reduced probability of a late-stage project reversal that's a verifiable material cost avoidance that protects massive development investment.
So the executive argument becomes, this investment in our IRM assurance infrastructure is mandatory because without the embedded assurance it provides, our most transformative initiatives, AI, digital transformation, expansion to new markets, they cannot scale.
And therefore, their multi-million-dollar investments are at risk of stalling or reversal.
Yeah.
You move the conversation from being a defensive cost avoidance mechanism to an offensive value enablement and systemic capital protection mechanism.
You're enabling future growth while simultaneously de-risking the present operating environment.
That's the conversation to have.
So what does this all mean? The core message from our deep dive today is that integrated risk management is a powerful distributed value generator. However, its value has been systematically underpriced by risk leaders who are still relying on legacy compliance-era ROI measurement models.
And risk leaders must urgently upgrade their measurement from that compliance-era ROI narrative to a rigorous dividend framework. It has to encompass efficiency, loss mitigation, and crucially, trust to capture the true strategic value. This shift is no longer optional. It is mandatory for executive steering enterprises through the accelerated complexity and velocity demands of the AI era.
And that complexity raises a final provocative thought for all of you grappling with these investment decisions. The rise of AI ensures that measurement rigor is no longer merely a technical accounting exercise. It is now a mandatory precondition for operational scale.
So the question to ask is this:
can your current measurement system handle the speed and the continuous evidence demands of an autonomous operating environment? If not, your scale is constrained, regardless of the quality of your AI models.
And if you want to dive deeper into the economics, the measurement models, and the specific insights from the research that drove today's conversation, we encourage you to subscribe to Wheelhouse Advisors Premium Research, the RTJ Bridge.
You can find that premium research by navigating to the url.rtj-bridge.com. We appreciate you taking this deep dive with us today.
That wraps up another episode of the Risk Wheelhouse. Thank you for spending time with us at Wheelhouse Advisors today. We hope you found the conversation insightful and actionable for your organization's risk strategies. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. If you're looking for more in-depth analysis and thought leadership on risk technology, be sure to visit the Risk Tech Journal at therisktechjournal.com. It's your go-to source for comprehensive articles, expert interviews, and the latest trends shaping the industry. Subscribe today to stay informed. For any inquiries or feedback, please contact us directly at info@wheelhouseadvisors.com, or feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and x.com and share your thoughts or suggestions for future topics. Visit wheelhouseadvisors.com for more information and resources. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, navigate wisely.